Hi, friends. Welcome to the Hey Fundraiser podcast. I'm your host, Mary Hackett, and whether you are a frontline fundraiser, the operations professional, a board member, or just someone wanting to make an impact in your community, this podcast is for you. We cover all facets of fundraising, and our main objective is to give you ideas and inspiration to help you raise more money. Join us as we grow, learn, and make an impact together. Hey, fundraiser, and hey, board members. If you are new to this podcast and you're a board member or you work closely with board members, I am glad you're here because we are going to talk about something that is right up your alley today. Today, we're going to dig deep, and I mean deep, into how to transform your board into storytelling fundraisers. Now, as nonprofit fundraisers, I know that you and I have tried really hard in times to get our board to do something, whether it is introducing someone in their network, whether it's hosting an event or, making an ask, going on cultivation visits. And it's not always easy to get board members out there in the community connecting with donors. Now, sometimes it is. Sometimes you find that unicorn of a board member that is ready to jump in when you call and says, how can I help? What do you need? What can I do? And by the way, if you find that board member, treat them like the royalty that they are and try to keep them forever because they are truly unicorns. And it is really hard to find board members like that. But I want to give you some solutions today that are going to help your board members feel more comfortable talking with donors, community members, their network, all the things, because it's really the stories are what brings people connecting to your organization. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you're going to see a set of slides, and I'm going to go ahead and share that now. If you are listening to this on your favorite streaming device, then you can go to the show notes and download a copy of these slides for free because I want you to be successful. My hope is that this really helps you take your board members to the next level. Okay, so we are going to dig into how your board members can lean in to their stories, to their experiences, to the stories of your client served, and really communicate that in an authentic and meaningful way. I've recorded a podcast in the past where, there's really 4 types of board members. There's the connector, and this group of board members are really great at opening up their networks. They are the people that at a party are going to go around, have fun, introduce themselves to everybody, just be social. They're going to bring people to an event you're having. They like to connect people, and they like to connect people to your organization. So we have our connectors. We love them. Then we have the storytellers. This group of board members can tell a story like nobody's business. It creates vulnerability. It's truthful. They have this element of trust that they bring to any story, and it's emotional, and they can connect with donors, whether that donor gives through their head, their heart, or their gut. So we also love our storytellers. Then we have visionaries. The visionaries are big picture people. They are helping you with your strategic plan. They're helping you to articulate what your organization looks like 15 years from now. They are looking at campaign materials and really trying to figure out, does this capture the strategy and the thinking of the organization's future? So we've talked about the connector, we've talked about the storyteller, we've talked about the visionary. All 3 of those board member types are not solicitors, because our 4th type is the closer. These are your solicitors, and they're rare. The board members who feel comfortable asking for a gift, they don't shy away. They want to meet new people. They want to talk about why they give. They bring social proof to a room or a coffee table. These are your solicitors. Now, the reason I go into this is because every board member is going to be one of these four. Or you might have board members who are a connector and a closer, or they're a storyteller and a connector, which is great. But the reason why I wanted to talk about this first, like right off the bat with this podcast, is because first and foremost, we have to respect and honor who our board members are. We don't want to put them in uncomfortable situations. We don't want to stretch them too far that they are way above and beyond where they are comfortable. And so when we start to think about our board members as one of these profiles, then we can plug them into our fundraising efforts in a really meaningful way. And it's meaningful to the organization, but it's also meaningful for the board member. Now, storyteller is one of the profiles, but what we're going to talk about today is that every board member needs to be somewhat of a storyteller. I mean, they might see a friend that they haven't seen in 10 years, and that friend could say, hey, what are you up to these days? Well, the board member says, I have 2 grandkids now. I serve on the board of the local, art museum, and I'm getting ready to take a cruise to Norway. I don't know. I just made that up. But if somebody says, tell me more about the local art museum that you're working with, they need to have their elevator pitch. They need to be able to briefly and in a very compelling way talk about the organization that they're volunteering for. So even though we have these 4 profiles, I want to honor these profiles, but at the same time, I'd like you to challenge your board to really think about the kinds of stories that we're about to go deep into. Before we go into that, I want to share a story myself. I've been working with an organization in Seattle for about 2 years now, and I'm doing major gift coaching with their co-executive director and their director of development. So the 3 of us, we meet every week, we sit down, we talk about prospects, we talk about next steps, we write proposals. I mean, anything that needs to happen to move their major gift program forward toward closing gifts. We had never had a lot of success engaging their board. They're in Seattle. They have this amazing board full of really high level corporate players. You've got Amazon, you've got Boeing, you've got Microsoft, you've got all these big corporations, and they were tapped into these amazing corporations and these amazing individuals. But we couldn't get the board members to lean in. Like they just, they were really great about making organizational decisions. They were really great about governance. But when it came to engaging donors, they were very hands off. Like there was just this space between them and connecting with donors. And so we worked really hard to get them to a place where they could share stories. Like they could really think about, why am I involved? Why do I give them my precious time? What does this organization mean to the community? If this organization wasn't here tomorrow, what would happen to our community? So I did a board retreat with them about 6 months ago, and the stories that came out of this board retreat were incredible. People were laughing. There were tears. There was data. There was emotion. It was just all the feels at the same time. But what happened was that board, not only did they gain their personal stories that they could kind of then take out to the community, and they just had them in their back pocket, this solidified the board. This exercise, the outcome that I did not anticipate was that this board would create this vulnerable day. It was a day-long retreat. And by the end of that day, there were tighter relationships. There were new relationships. They felt more like a unit than they ever had in the past. So that was a huge success story. And so 3 board members, their stories were so compelling that we ended up using those 3 stories at an event, a fundraising event, that brought in 6 figures. I mean, there was one donor who was so moved, he put up $100,000 match of the event. Like clearly we need to give to this organization. I'm going to put up $100,000 to match every gift tonight. So stories make a difference. I would urge you to do what I did with my client in your own organization, is to download this deck from the show notes page and actually go through this as an exercise with your board. Take an afternoon. I promise it will be very powerful. Okay, so here are 3 stories that every board member needs to have, and then we're gonna really unpack these here in a moment. We need to have every board member understand, what is their involvement story? Why are they giving their precious time to this organization? And this should be personal. It shouldn't be jargony. It lends credibility to the person who's speaking. It's one thing to say, oh, well, I'm an executive at a company and I have to serve on 3 boards and I picked organization A to be on the board. Okay, that is the worst story ever. So it's another thing to say, I work with the local boys and girls clubs because when I was a kid, it was my safe haven after school. And I don't know that I would be where I am today if I didn't have that foundational start at the Boys and Girls Club. So the best thing I can be spending my time on is helping them be successful. That's a good story. So every board member needs their involvement story. That's first and foremost. The second thing they need is an impact story. And this demonstrates the need for the organization to exist. The impact stories are really going to come from the organization. So these are stories you're going to want to share with your board members. And those stories, whatever resonates with them, they can then take that out into the community. This would be, and I'm just going to make this up on the fly, but, an impact story would be, a client came in to the food bank. She was really struggling to feed her young children. And because of the work of the food bank and donors like yourselves, not only have we been able to give them healthy and nutritious meals, but part of our services is helping people find jobs. So she's now in a job that she loves, and now she's giving back by volunteering at the food bank. So, something like that. The third story is a thank you story. And this is the story. It's very similar to the impact story, but it's a story that a board member would tell when they're thanking a donor. And I would make this as close as possible to whatever the donor supported. So again, another example, if you work in healthcare and a donor paid for a mobile mammography truck, then a thank you story would maybe be, with this truck, we've been able to go into the community, and I would name a specific community because the details are important. We went into this community, we screened, 300 clients that had never had a mammogram before. And we were able to address their health needs and questions. And we had early detection for 3 women, and that probably saved their lives. So you need a thank you story. Every board member needs a thank you story that they can tell when they're thanking a donor. So these are your 3 stories: involvement story, impact story, thank you story. Now, before we really dig into this, I want to talk to you about emotions versus facts and data. I've been to New York where I have 15 minutes to make an ask. And I've also gone to a lunch in Texas that was 3 hours because we just had such a great time. You have to really consider your audience, and do they give from their head? Do they give from their heart? Or do they give from their gut? And you have to weigh whether you want to tell an emotional story or you want one that's filled with facts and data. And both are very effective, but I want to paint a picture for you. So I'm going to give you 3 numbers or facts. And I want you to see how connected you are to one of these 3. So the first one is just a number, 1,028. So does that do anything for you? Does that ring a bell? 1028, is your birthday on October 28th? Like, does that do anything for you? Probably not. The second fact is 1776. Well, now once you hear that number, you start to think about, that's the birth of our country. There's historical relevance. Like there's a little warm and fuzzy, right? Like you're starting to connect with that number. And the third is 9/11. Now, when you say 9/11, you get a flood of emotions. I mean, people always have said, like, where were you on 9/11? How did you learn about 9/11? There are stories, there is weight behind the phrase 9/11. So even if you are doing facts and data and your donor or your prospect that you're talking to is all about data and facts, you always have to remember that numbers mean nothing without a good story behind them. Like 1028, our fact number 1, nothing. I got nothing. It means nothing to me. 1776, okay. I'm American. I know what that number means. 9/11, emotional. So just remember that even when you're doing facts and data, it's really important to have a good story. So there are 7 story triggers. And I would try to implement as many of these as possible into your stories. And you'll start to notice that stories aren't just off the cuff. Stories need to be really thought about and reflected upon. And you bake these 7 triggers into your story at the right time because you're thinking about your audience and all that good stuff. But the board retreat that I mentioned earlier, I mean, we spent all day building the boards. Every single board member left that day with an impact story, a thank you story, and their involvement story. And it took all day to do that. So it's not just like, oh, hey, here, this happened at the the Red Cross today, and so here's a quick story. It should be much more meaningful than that. Okay, first of the story triggers is ownership. So what you want to do is you want to try to get your audience to experience what it is like to be a client for your organization. And you do this, if you're talking to an older couple who have grandchildren and they love their grandchildren, and you work for an organization that is helps people with disabilities, specifically maybe hearing, part of that ownership, you could say something like, could you imagine not being able to communicate with your grandchildren? Like, help them feel what it is like to be a client for your organization. The second is mystery. So when your audience doesn't really know what to expect, they become attentive and engaged. So as you're telling stories and there's a little bit of mystery, you'll notice people lean in. People want to hear more. They're kind of on the edge of their seat. Now, don't be weird. don't make it so mysterious and nebulous and crazy that people can't follow it. I mean, just a little bit of intrigue really can go a long way. Next is uniqueness. So find something about your organization that people don't know. People love to learn something new. It gives them something interesting to grab onto, to think about later, to share with their friends. So spend a minute really thinking about what has never been shared before. I mean, it could be that, of course, I'm just making all this up, but it could be that your organization, it was going to be 100 years old next year, but when the organization started, there were a bunch of false, starts and stops until the right leadership came in. And now we're only celebrating 95 because it took us 5 years to get it together. But our 100th is in 5 years. I mean, just something like that. The fourth story trigger is familiarity. So again, you want to use elements that are familiar to your audience. It has to be relatable. If you're talking to a group of retired teachers, you don't want your story to be all about, what it's like in the business world, or, just something that isn't really relatable. So familiarity, it connects people to the story. So if your audience can't feel and picture what it's like to be in the story or watching the story, then you've just kind of lost your audience at that point. Next is humanity, and this is critical. You have to find the humanity in your stories. I am shocked about how many people will tell a story about a building. That's not a great story. I mean, unless it is a great story, but you'd have to call me and convince me it's a great story. People don't care about the actual walls. I mean, I know capital campaigns are sexy and they're big and it's all encompassing and it's, rah, rah, rah for the organization. People care about what happens inside those walls. They don't care about the actual walls. So really find the humanity. I mean, if you're talking about something and there's no people involved, that's a problem. It's a bit of a red flag. Contrast. This is also very powerful. So people get contrast. So make sure you show a strong difference between why your organization is here and what would happen if it wasn't here. So this goes back a little bit to the grandparents. Could you imagine not being able to hear your grandchildren? So if you can show the difference, the strong difference that your organization makes in the community, you're on a good path. And then lastly is tell why it's so important for people to support your organization today, right now. So you need a little bit of urgency. Now, you want to be careful with this one because you don't want so much urgency that people think, oh, if I make a gift, it's going to a sinking ship. Nobody wants to give to a sinking ship. I just had a conversation about this with a coaching client. You want to present need and urgency, but not take it so far that people think that, in a month, the organization might not be here anymore. So talk to people about why it's important for them to support your organization now. So those are your 7 story triggers. And just for those listening, I'm just going to run through them really quick. So you want ownership, you want an element of mystery, you want uniqueness, you want familiarity, humanity, contrast, and urgency. Now, you don't have to have all of those in one story, but these are something that you can keep in your back pocket, pick 1 or 2, and integrate it into your stories. Now, let's dig into our 3 big stories that every board member should have. And this is the exact slide deck that I used in that board retreat about 6 months ago. So first, let's talk about every board member's involvement story. So I've put up a couple questions on the screen here just to get people thinking about the organization and how they became involved. Now, the questions are very helpful because if you say, oh, how are you involved with the organization? Well, you might say, oh, I learned about it from my brother, or, something that's just not well thought out. It's off the cuff. Somebody asks you. But when you spend a minute and really try to think through these questions, I guarantee you are going to come up with a much more compelling story than if you didn't. So let's talk about some of these questions. Now, this is about involvement. So the first question is, When were you first aware of the organization? Like, is there a story there? Did you learn about it because you know somebody who got services at the organization? The next question is, what's one thing that stood out to you at first? Was it the executive director made a speech somewhere and you saw it and you were just like, oh my gosh, I have to be involved in this organization? What was the impact the organization had that inspired you to want to give your time as a board member? You know, we all have, there's a lot of differences in life. All of us are unique, but the one thing that all of us have is the same amount of time. And so when you have a board member or any volunteer giving time, it's a big deal. So what was the impact that inspired you as a board member to give your time? Next is, why do you personally feel compelled to be involved? If you're working with the American Diabetes Association, does diabetes run in your family? Did you have a friend that had complications? Like, what is the personal connection between you as a board member and what this organization does? How did you first get involved? So maybe it was through a volunteer group and you just kind of met some people at the organization and felt really compelled to spend more time with the organization. And then lastly, why do you think the organization is a worthy cause? It's really shocking to me. A lot of board members, I don't know that they have really sat down and thought through each of these questions, because it's a very eye-opening, enlightening, and joyful, frankly, exercise. So if you're doing a board retreat or a presentation to your board, bring some of these things up so that they can noodle on it and digest it and really think about it. So these are 6 questions that are going to help your board members understand and articulate their involvement story. Okay, next is their impact story. Now, this is really where the rubber meets the road when it comes to the 7 triggers that we've talked about, emotion versus data and facts. So the impact story is all about taking someone on a journey of, going from point A to point B. And there's a lot of ways you can go from point A to point B. Reference the 7 triggers we talked about. When you're thinking about an impact story, 1, who is going to be the main character? And side note, that main character should really be the person or event that relates best to the audience that you're talking to. So again, remembering your audience is paramount when you're telling stories. What is the obstacle that your main character needs to overcome? I mean, is it hunger insecurities? Is it cancer? Is it challenges due to disabilities? Is it houselessness and homelessness? I mean, what is it and what is the obstacle? Third question is, what are some unique details to better illustrate your character's problems? So instead of saying somebody is houseless, maybe we say that this person, it was a war veteran that came upon hard times. And you can outline what those hard times were. It could be a divorce. It could be, death of a child. It could be mental health challenges, whatever it is. But put those details in, because you never know what's going to make somebody lean in. And when they do, and then, pay attention, because when they do lean in, you want to understand why they're doing that. What does your organization do to alleviate the problem that you're talking about? And then how does your character mentally cope with the situation? So a lot of times storytellers they talk about physical, they talk about the surroundings, but one element that's often left out is the mental aspect. What was your main character thinking about? What were they feeling? What what other obstacles were happening at the same time that they kind of had to grapple with inside their brains. So think about how your character mentally coped with whatever situation you're talking about. And then importantly, our last question is, why is your organization the right organization to be tackling this issue? So you always, as a board member, when you're telling a story, and by the way, it shouldn't be like 3 days long, right? You want to have this succinct 3 to 4 minute story that you can share where people don't get bored. They don't, start remembering what's on my grocery list or what am I going to do after work? Like there's not all this internal banter, but they're actually actively listening. So a lot of board members, when they tell their story, they're really good about talking about the obstacle, talking about what the character is, feeling. But what they don't do is then relate it back to the organization. And that is a critical piece. So why is your organization the right organization, the perfect organization to be tackling the issue that you're talking about? So these are questions that you, as if you're a major gift officer, if you're an executive director, if you work at a nonprofit, these are some of these stories you want to supply. And whether you have a mission moment at every board meeting where a client comes in and talks to you, or your executive director, shares something that happened this month. But you want to think through these questions when you're sharing it with your board so that they can internalize it and then tell other people. Impact stories are huge. Okay, last is your thank you story. So we've got 5 questions here that will just help your board members kind of get their head around how to verbally demonstrate to a donor that the gift made a huge difference. So who was helped by the donor's gift? Was it the details are important. So instead of saying we helped over 1,000 people get food, well, that's great. And that's a great metric, probably a good internal metric, but it's much better to talk about, the little boy who came to the food bank with his mom and, got to eat an apple for the first time. I mean, of course I just made that up, but these are the things that you really want to weigh. Do you want to talk about thousands? That's like nebulous and it's hard to get people's head around, or do you want to talk about the one person that is relatable? So who was helped? What was the obstacle that specific donation helped overcome? Is there a picture or object that illustrates what the donor's gift has accomplished? Is it that little boy with the apple? Is it, the local YMCA and it's, kids who are learning how to swim? Any of that, any life skills, if there's a picture, an object, that really goes a long way as well. Is there a quote from the donation's recipient saying how much their life has been changed? This leads to significant credibility. So it is the nonprofit's responsibility to be connected to the people that they're serving. That includes sharing stories and quotes from those who are served. So if you can equip your board members with this, you are on the right path, my friend. And then lastly, are there any details from the effect of the gift that would be special for the donor to hear? I mean, you really have to know the donor and what speaks to the donor to then tell a story back that's so impactful and meaningful. But if you have a strong major gift program, you have deep connections with your donors, these are the details that you want to put in or help your board member with so that it's so special and that the stewardship just is off the charts for that one donor. Okay, so we talked about the involvement story. We've talked about the impact story, and we've talked about the thank you story. all three need to be in your board member's back pocket and rehearsed and, like gone through run throughs. And, maybe you say it in the mirror, maybe they say it at a board meeting, whatever it is. These are stories that they just need to be able to pull out at any moment. So I want to end with 9 storytelling rules to remember. First, stories must be about the impact your organization has in the community. The story should not be about the walls. It should be what happens inside the walls. And it really needs to be impactful. I mean, we've talked a little bit about, okay, we've sent, 9 million pairs of shoes to a poor community internationally. Okay, 9 million can mean a lot to different people. And it's also hard to kind of wrap your head around. So talk about the impact, talk about, 9 million pairs of shoes is great, but what's the one person who that impacted their entire life? Okay, second is have a personal connection to the story you're telling. It feels a little inauthentic if you're not connected. If it doesn't mean something to you, then you're not going to be able to make it mean something else to someone else. So make sure that you have a connection to the story and to the organization. Also, third is know why you're telling this story. Do you want to tell an impact story? Is it for thank yous? Is it that you're saying this in front of other board members to maybe inspire them to help raise money? Whatever it is, just know why you're telling the story, because that helps kind of ground you and make you feel good about telling the story. Start your story by connecting with your audience first. Now, this is a very powerful statement, and there are dozens of ways you can do that. You can ask questions, like we talked about earlier. How would it feel not to be able to have a conversation with your grandchildren? So you can ask questions. You can, if you know your audience and you know that one particular thing is of grave importance, say it. Like, make sure you connect the story that you're going to tell with the audience and why you're going to tell it to them. So just connect with your audience first. It will make the rest of the story memorable. The main character should always be a person served. It should not be the donor. It should not be the organization. The main character should always be the client served by your organization. The hero of the story is the organization or the donors. So this is a very important element. So your main character is always going to be somebody served. The hero can be your organization, what you supplied. You're just trying to help an audience understand why your organization exists. Next is include only details that move your story along. If you're up there talking about, details that nobody cares about, people's minds are going to drift. Only talk about what's relevant to the story. I mean, a lot of people, they get on a story and then they're like, oh, I just remembered something else. And they go off on another tangent and then they kind of come back to the story. That's too much. Really include only the details that help move your story along. Number 8 is practice your story. So at this board retreat, that was one of the best board retreats I have ever had in my entire career. That was the goal. So we spent time, we did one story at a time. So we talked about what your involvement story is. And then they had 30 minutes to really think through the involvement story and write it down. And then every board member presented their involvement story. Then we went to the impact story. We went through all the questions. board members had 20 minutes to think about the story that resonated most and how they wanted to tell it. And then every board member shared their impact story. So this was about helping them practice and say it out loud. I mean, it's one thing to, I've got notes, but I've never actually said the words out loud. You don't want to go into an important room with an important story that you've never told anybody before. So practice makes perfect. And lastly, tell your story with passion. If you get choked up, that's okay. You don't hide it. If there's a joke in there, laugh when people laugh. Like just connect and use that passion that you have as a board member for the organization as you're telling this story. So there's a lot here. This is why I built the deck so that you can download it if you need to. But these 9 storytelling rules are really going to help you just hit it out of the park. So I would urge you to do a couple things. One is, if your board has not done a storytelling exercise, I would recommend that you download this deck from the show notes page, brand it for your organization, and at your next board retreat, take 2 or 3 hours. I promise it will be the most impactful time for your board members. And it just created this amazing bond. And then as board members come on, sit down with each of them to work through what their stories are, their 3 stories. So that's first and foremost. If you're a board member and you're listening to this podcast because your lovely development professional told you to listen to it, I would highly recommend that you also download the slides and sit down and really think through the questions, like build your stories. And if you need to call your development director, if you need to call a board member and say, hey, I need to practice these stories, then do it. Because what that's going to do is that's going to help your development professional know you're working on things, but then it's also going to inspire other board members like, oh, maybe I need my story and I need something in my back pocket just in case things come out. So if you want to talk about how to build your perfect storytelling board retreat, if you want to talk about your major gift program, you can always schedule a call with me. Believe me, fundraising is my most favorite topic. Talk about it all day. So if you want to schedule, it's called a game plan call with me. I'd love to hear your situation, help any way I can. And you do that by going to www.heyfundraiser.com/book. Okay, fundraiser and board members, I hope you have a great day. Thanks for listening. Hey, fundraiser, thanks so much for being here today. Did you know that we create a special page for each episode that has helpful links, episode highlights, standout quotes, and freebies? Check it out in today's episode description. If you loved what you heard today, would you kindly give us a rating and review? It really helps other fundraising professionals find our Hey Fundraiser community. I'm Mary Hackett, and thank you for listening.